We moved into this community in 1955, and we were in the first annexation north of what they call the historic section now. And at that time, I was sharing cars with a guy I worked with. One day a week, I would take him to work and his wife would have the car, and another day a week we would reverse it. Turned out that he was on the high school problems committee and invited me to the meeting. And I went to the meeting, and he complained that none of the editors would print his articles. He never came back, but I stayed and handled the publicity for 2 years. I contacted the editors of Park Ridge Citizen, the Norwood Herald, and the Harlem Irving Times, and they said, if you get your material in by this time, it will be printed. And they did, for the whole 2 years. So I had good cooperation from them. Now, every one of the committee were representatives of a different organization, school boards, parent teachers, township, and so on. I was not. I came as a volunteer. I didn't represent any particular group. That's how I got involved. And we spent 2 years studying the possibility of having a school. There was strong opposition against it, and the arguments were real. The schools were surrounding us. Well, I have to step back a little bit. At that time, it was a non-high school district where the district taxed the people and they sent their children, paid the tuition to surrounding schools. The state said you can't do that anymore. And Martin Schroeder, who was president of the board, asked them for a 2-year period for us to determine our own fate. Do we join the adjoining schools? Do we have our own school? Or we do nothing, let the state decide our future? It was a new community, assessed valuation was low. Mayor Sieb, mayor of Norridge, was strong for the school. He knew what was going to be built. He knew that the assessed valuation would be there when we needed it. On the other hand, others said the schools around us would be better. The referendum passed by 2 votes. That's how close it was. And both sides were right. So that's where we started. I was not involved with the school board after the referendum. There were mixed feelings. But it's hard to put it in a nutshell because a lot of people attended the meetings, they asked questions. I mean, they were really interested. When we held our seminars for the public, it was packed. It wasn't indifferent. And although I was in the original part of researching possibility of a school, when I got up and they were asking me questions, one guy says, you were on the group that were studying the school. Why are you for the school? I says, because I know what it's all about and I am for the school. Now, Fran Bernero, and she was very much involved after the school was built, was dead against the school. And her arguments were real. But once the school was established, she was right behind it and was very much involved in getting it established and getting it started. This was unincorporated township, Norwood Park Township. Howard Heights was formed in 1947, a year before Norridge. There was a gentleman's agreement between the 2 mayors that the borderline between the 2 would be I forget the street. Anyway, factories that were built near Harwood Heights needed the infrastructure, they annexed into Harwood Heights, which broke the gentleman's agreement. The agreement was that Norwich would not go east of Harlem Avenue. Well, the builders east of Harlem Avenue wanted to join Norwich. So the animosity started there, and it still exists. But as far as the school goes, that was a unifying thing for the whole community. Mm-hmm. They were going to surrounding schools. They went to Maine, they went to Leiden, they went to Taft, they went to Schurz, they went to Lane, and they had to find their own way. There was no busing. You had to walk to where you found a streetcar or whatever it was to take you to school. And they were outsiders at those schools. The situation still exists in Harwood Heights, where they're part of Maine. The students from Harwood Heights at Maine are outsiders. And because they have no transportation back home, they are not participating in the sports. So this unified the community quite a bit.
What were some of the things you had to do to campaign to convince everybody to vote yes?
Thank you.
What the company I worked for was an advertising specialty part of the business, and they had these little electric cars that looked like a milk wagon, and they would give them out as promotion to their vendors. So I borrowed one, built it, and put a sign on there promoting the school. Steve, at 4 years old, was driving it up and down the street while I have a PA system telling people to get out and vote. So that's where the little car came into it. I had to give the car back. Steve is still crying.
Just going back to the disagreement between the two parties, like the yes and the no, for the referendum, what were like the biggest conflicts between them, and why would people be against the school, which sounds like such a good idea?
They couldn't afford it. Brand new school, good schools surrounding that we could join. Those were the key issues. Those for it could see unification of the community. The kids that are going to all surrounding schools now are going to one school and they're part of the community.
How would you counter the argument that it was too expensive? What was the counter to that? At that time, you had to look at the assessed valuation of property. That's where your tax money came from. And it was very low. I don't know whether we needed $40 million or something like that. And we didn't have it. But Mayor Steve knew these factories were coming in. This builder was going to build 20 houses, and he could see where the assessed valuation was going to be adequate. Not more than enough, but adequate. And that was the argument against we can't afford it. That's a good argument.
And two people were for it. I'll tell you something. I was a watcher at the referendum at the basement of Giles School, and people coming and voting, and I happened to notice this old codger. Now I'm saying old codger then. He's probably younger than I am now, but anyway, he takes his ballot and he makes a paper wad out of it and he throws it in. I noticed that, forgot about it. When they start counting the votes, someone says, "Oh, look what I got here." They opened it up, it was blank. He did not vote. That one vote could have made a big difference. But there were a lot of people who were illiterate, who would vote, pretend they were voting. So there's a different atmosphere today.
So with the 2-vote difference, what was the reaction to that, and was there like a recount, and how was?
Oh, yes, there was a recount. I went to court, yes,
Really?
oh, yes. And the court validated the referendum. That took a while,
How long about?
about a year. The courts don't move fast. But I did not run for the school board. At that time, Catherine was pregnant. She was having problems. I'm away from home all the time. She's really upset. So the doctor said, you got to stay home and take care of your wife. So I dropped out. Believe it or not, 2 of the men on the new school board, their wives lost their fetuses. Being in this kind of volunteer school boards, whatever it is, takes a lot from the family. And at that time, it was all brand new. They were on their own. It's a real strain on the family. And anyone who volunteers and works for the community is giving up a lot at home.
Interview-wise, this is going to be about the last one that I asked you, but seeing as you were there in literally the very beginning of the school and now sitting in it right now, what, as far as change and transition, have you seen? Like kind of what we were talking about earlier.
You're talking about the difference at the beginning and now?
Yeah, or just the process of change that you've seen.
Well, the community has grown and it can afford more, and the school had more money. And from just being a school, trying to teach a lot of kids in a small space, we now have a professional grade facility. And the success of the education is measured by the success of the alumni. When the school first opened and everybody was questioning their ability, 8 years later they're picked as one of the top 10 schools in the United States. In a short while, that was a real accomplishment, and it was an indication of the way the school was going to go. The area was unincorporated. Before 1948, the people who lived here, and a friend of mine who I got well acquainted with, and I've been talking their sons, they moved here in 1936. The community had 1-inch water pipe from a private water company supplying water to the whole group, which was from Harlem to Montrose, Irving, and Ozanam. That was what they called the historic section. They had no streets, they had no sewers. When it rained, it was muddy. The kids would put on boots, walk to Irving Park to catch the bus. Well, actually catch a horse and wagon that's going into town. They'd leave their boots on the curb, so when they came home, they put them back on so they could walk to their house. That's the conditions that were here. They were people who couldn't afford a home anywhere else. My friends at Wolf Isles, they paid, I think, $1,200 for their home, and it was a big mortgage. It was difficult to pay for. That was the economic situation at that time.
So just before the referendum, before this, that's sort of fast forwarding a little bit further in, you're saying it was unincorporated, and folks who had come here, were they moving out from the city then? And that's...
Well, what happened at the same time, they were putting in the Eisenhower Expressway and the Kennedy Expressway, which uprooted long ethnic neighborhoods. Also at that time, GI educated veterans were now moving in with their families, and there were a lot of them that moved in here. So we had a mixture of different ethnics move in. When we moved in, Divine Savior didn't exist. They held masses in the basement of Giles School with a portable altar. And I would buy the Tribune so I could kneel on it. It was too hard kneeling on a hard floor. They got support to build a church. The priest lived in a house on Odell. They built a church in the basement. The second floor was a school, and the third floor was the nuns lived. That's how they started out. Until they built a convent, then the nuns moved. Later on, they built a place for the priests. The original idea was to start and then build a big church, and it never happened. So you want to know what else was happening at that time in 1955?
Yeah.
Chief Alexander Robinson, whose home was in the forest preserve, which is called Robinson Woods, just east of the river at Lawrence Avenue, North Lawrence Avenue, burnt down. That was the last of his descendants that lived on the property. You probably heard about the Peterson Schuster boys who were murdered and found in Robinson Woods. That happened at that time. Now, I started the Norwich Historical Museum, the village, and the veterans. I was the original historian. I befriended a guy from Franklin Park who was a freelance photographer in the early years, and he took a lot of police pictures. He had taken pictures of the bodies. They couldn't tie the murder. They knew who did it, but they couldn't tie it. So the FBI went and they wanted to see his pictures, and they enlarged the pictures, and by chance one of the bodies is laying on a piece of harness that had the name of the stable. And that is how they were able to convict the murderer.